Railway Conversations with Doc Frank.
Hi, this is Doc Frank. Welcome to another episode of my podcast, Railway Conversations. Unfortunately, the interview that I had planned for this episode did not happen, or I couldn't finish it. The simple reason was that the temperature in the mobile studio that I have went too high, went above 40 degrees, and my laptop went on a heat strike. So I couldn't finish that interview. I will have to reschedule it for next week. So for today's episode, to bridge that gap, I want to share with you a presentation on the topic of regional fast rail that I did a few years ago, which I polished off, updated, and I hope you will enjoy that and find it of interest. The definition of regional fast rail, some examples for candidate railway lines here in Australia, and also a case study from India, and closing off with a recommendation which signaling system would be the most suitable one for these regional fast rail applications. Please enjoy after a word from our sponsor. Hi, it's Doc Frank again. What can I say? Even the best CBTC training in the world arguably can get even better. And that's what's happened with the brand new 2024 Understanding CBTC Fundamentals training. This is an upgrade from the previous CBTC Kickstarter training that exists since 2014 and has been continuously refined, improved, and updated. You have a massive 30 video lessons that you can watch on demand as long as you live. You've got lifelong access. You can build a certifiable CBTC competency, and the certification is offered by me as well as an additional option. You do not need prior signaling knowledge for this training. Just imagine that you can learn the fundamentals of CBTC without needing to know anything about railway signaling before the training. So that really makes it suitable for anybody working in the railway industry and for anybody being interested in working in the railway industry. The training is topped up by an industry-leading Q&A support over at least 12 months. You can sign up for this fantastic training under docfranktraining.podia.com/CBTC. I repeat that, docfranktraining.podia.com/CBTC. And if you needed one additional argument, this course is actually cheaper than last year's training. So that's my way of helping you fighting inflation. Hope you enjoy, and I hope to see you at this CBTC training. So let's talk about digital signaling for what I call regional fast rail. And let's start with a definition of what that means. In my view, there are three main pillars for passenger rail transport, not just here in Australia where I live, but pretty much in most other countries as well. The first pillar is the traffic that's inside a city. So this blue bubble here should indicate a city area in my typical elaborate way of drawing things. And the passenger rail transport inside those city limits would be metro or suburban service at higher capacity, which is the first pillar of passenger rail transport. So outside a city, there are some green bubbles shown here, which indicate regional centers. So they are obviously not as big as the city. So you see these bubbles are smaller than the blue one in the middle. And they need to be within a certain vicinity of that city. They mustn't be too far away. And the second pillar of passenger rail transport is the connection between the city and those regional centers. And this is what I call regional fast rail for the purpose of this presentation here. And then lastly, the third pillar, if you have another city with metro traffic in the city area, the blue one, and regional fast rail between that city and the regional centers of that city, which are quite a bit away from any other major cities. The third pillar then is a direct connection between those two cities, and this would normally be done with very high speed because those cities are normally relatively far apart. Not everywhere, but definitely in the example of Australia, if we take cities like Melbourne, Sydney, and Brisbane, which are all between 800 and 900 kilometers apart, Melbourne 8 to 900 from Sydney, and Sydney then again 8 to 900 from Brisbane. Between Melbourne and Brisbane, that's basically the sum of the two, so it's round about 1700 kilometers. And very high speed can go either via a direct connection, which you can see doesn't really stop at any regional centers, or it could connect regional centers along the line between the cities, and also some regional centers inside the city areas or inside the wider city boundaries, like in the example on the left, where a regional center is not too far away from the route of the very high-speed intercity connection. So let's talk about some characteristics to differentiate between these three modes of passenger rail transport. And this can be defined by the number of stops, by the speeds of the rail connections, and also by the sizes. And I will explain this in a moment. So looking at what's happening inside cities, that's a metro, and I put it in inverted commas because in some cities it's not so much a typical metro like, I don't know, Singapore, for example, or Hong Kong. It could be more a high capacity suburban service, but it's definitely a relatively high capacity service where a lot of people want to go very frequently inside the city boundaries or the suburban boundaries. So these rail networks are normally characterized by many stops, by relatively slow speeds. So 80 kilometers per hour is a typical metro speed, and 130 is the highest speed that I know of suburban services here in Australia. In Perth, for example, the suburban trains go up to 130 on certain parts of the network. And all of this happens within the suburban or metropolitan boundaries of the respective city. So for the second type, the regional fast rail, as I said before, that's a connection between a major city and surrounding regional centers. So this is often done via express services with a limited number of stops. The speeds are higher, normally between 160 and 250 kilometers per hour, so definitely faster than the inner city connections. And the route lengths for those regional fast rail connections to be efficient is somewhere between 80 and 200 kilometers. So that was indicated on the previous slide with the bubbles and the circles, that the regional centers around a city shouldn't be too far away, because then the connection to the city is really no longer efficient. And for the third pillar, the city to city very high speed connections, as I indicated in the previous slide, there may be a need, also a political need, to connect regional centers which are not covered by regional fast rail. For example, if you take in Australia the connection between Melbourne and Sydney, in between those two cities we have Canberra, which is the capital of Australia, not really a city, it's rather small, but this is where the government sits. And since the government, the federal government, will pay for a very high-speed connection, it would be very obvious to expect a stop of this very high-speed line in Canberra, because who's got the money can have wishes where that railway line should stop. The other thing here that's just food for thought is that the technology for a very high-speed connection doesn't necessarily have to be a railway line. So in my view, railway connections have a maximum achievable speed of probably around 400 kilometers per hour. So you can see existing high-speed connections or very high-speed connections elsewhere in the world. They are reaching speeds of 350 kilometers per hour. Sometimes they try to go to 360, but this is already pushing the envelope. And even in trial runs and experiments, I haven't really seen any speeds over 400 kilometers per hour. So the chances of achieving higher speeds on a commercial day-to-day basis are, in my view, very slim. And that is really due to the technology and their physical limitations. Now, there are other technologies for passenger land transport that's guided along rails or along other infrastructure that allows for higher speeds. So, for example, we have maglev, that's a technology for magnetic levitation, which have achieved higher speeds than 400 kilometers per hour. However, I'm not aware of any speeds higher than 600, which seems to be some kind of ceiling of that technology. So you see, you've got a comparison here where the maximum achievable speed of a very high speed connection with a magnetic levitation system could be 1.5 times as high as for a typical steel-to-steel railway connection. And then, of course, you've got relatively new technology and probably the least mature of the three technologies, to be fair, which is Hyperloop. Hyperloop is promising speeds of more than 1,000 kilometers per hour, which is comparable to the speed of air travel. And I think, just to have a rule of thumb, the ceiling speed for Hyperloop is probably somewhere around 1,200 kilometers per hour, give or take. So as a rule of thumb, it's roughly 3 times, or it can be up to 3 times as fast as a rail connection, and still about twice as fast as a maglev connection. So that gives you a certain relation of speed. And when the journey time between the two cities really plays an important role, and if you try to win passengers away from air traffic towards rail, then depending on the distance between cities, it may be a consideration whether rail is really the right technology or whether one should consider other technologies. So what I'm not saying here is that Hyperloop would be face value the best technology to use for these very high speed connections. It depends very much on the circumstances. For example, whether you have an existing rail network that you want to keep using in parts. But if you want to build a very new corridor anyway, and if you don't require interoperability with other rail systems, which is probably not really advisable for a very high-speed connection anyway, then I think it's only justified to have a look at different technology options that may deliver higher speeds. So why is regional fast rail such an interesting concept that I mentioned in differentiation with metro suburban on the one hand and very high speed on the other hand? Why do we need a third category in the middle? The growth of capital cities and regional centers is ongoing. So we have an ongoing urbanization, not just in Australia. That's probably a topic for pretty much all the countries in the world, which means that cities and city populations are constantly growing. And the same applies to some extent also to regional centers, which you may consider as mini cities in their own rights. If you want cities to keep growing, there are natural limits to that, where you don't really want to expand the boundaries of the cities too much. And the next best thing really is for cities to have satellites to supplement their growth. And what could happen here is that with a fast, efficient connection, those regional centers around the cities could develop into those satellites, which are almost like outer suburbs of cities, if the transport connection is fast enough and efficient enough. That was the perspective from a city point of view. From the regional center point of view, the connection, a fast and efficient connection to the nearest big city is really important for those regional centers to keep growing and to keep prospering, because the economic power of the major cities is much better than for the regional centers. And some of this will really transfer to the regional centers if there is an efficient and fast connection. Fast rail beats cars in the center-to-center journey time. And you will see examples in Australia on the following slides. Very often the car connections, the road connections between cities and suburban or regional centers are very congested. They are very well used, and very often you've got traffic jams, or car traffic doesn't really provide a very efficient and a very fast transport mode. And railway, especially faster railway that's designed for speed, could beat the car traffic, or will beat the car traffic substantially. The key idea is, if it's better and faster to travel by rail compared to roads, then the rail connection would attract commuters. Commuters are people that travel on a certain connection pretty much on a daily basis. For example, people going to their workplace, or students going to university, or students going to school. And commuters is really the biggest group of passengers, the biggest patronage. So if you want to create a decent, attractive patronage for regional fast rail, then commuters is the main target audience that you want to attract. A third aspect why regional fast rail has become so popular is that there's a strong political support. And that's mainly due to the first point on the slide, the growth demand of both the cities and the regional centers. So that's pretty important for governments, both on federal level and on state level. And that's why railway connections between those cities and subcenters really has a lot of political support. In Australia, there is a new so-called high-speed rail authority that was recently founded in late 2023. And this high-speed rail authority has put the connection between Sydney and Newcastle as the first priority to concentrate on. Sydney to Newcastle in itself could be considered a regional fast rail connection, because Newcastle is the biggest regional center in the Sydney area. The way this is currently looked at is that Sydney to Newcastle could become the first stage or the first link of a longer connection from Sydney to Brisbane. So it's currently considered as part of a potential future very high speed connection. But for the time being, for the foreseeable future, where it will just start with that first line and an ongoing connection all the way to Brisbane is not really defined. It's not really on the cards right now, at least not in practice with concrete dates. And therefore, in the meantime, it would be prudent to consider Sydney to Newcastle simply as a regional fast rail connection. The financing remains the biggest challenge, but maybe if that connection could be sold as part of a future high-speed network in Australia, there may be a combination of federal finance and state finance, which I believe is possible, is necessary to finance big projects and costly projects like this, like Sydney to Newcastle. And another very important point, which I believe is often underestimated, the benefit cost ratio of regional fast rail is normally much better than for very high speed. At least I think that's definitely the case here in Australia. Very high speed is, of course, the white elephant, the shiny object that everybody is keen to see happening. But from a commercial reality, from the benefits that you get for your investment, the investments in metro and suburban rail to have better transport inside the cities will always have the highest benefit cost ratio of the three pillars for passenger rail transport, because the patronage, the ridership is by far the highest. But then a clear second, I believe, is regional fast rail, and very high speed comes clearly after that on number 3 in the ranking. Some key requirements for regional fast rail. That's important to make sure that those projects are really attractive and potentially successful. The journey time is really everything. That's the key consideration. And as a rule of thumb, the connection between a city and a regional center should be either under 1 hour, or if it's already under 1 hour today, then it should reduce the journey time by about 50%. So either one or the other. So any regional center that cannot fulfill this requirement, or that's clearly above 1 hour journey time, even with regional fast rail, is probably not a very suitable candidate for regional fast rail in the first place. And we will look at examples where I explain what I mean by that. The second important consideration here, the speed, the absolute speed of the rail connection. It's something that people like to boast with. It gets eyeballs and it's very popular in press releases and what have you, but it's rather secondary. So an attractive journey time is more important. And you may argue that with higher speed, you also get better journey times. Well, it depends. If you have a large number of stops on a line where trains can hardly ever achieve their top speed, then the maximum achievable speed is really not that relevant. And the effect of a higher top speed on journey time is rather negligible. Express services and straight corridors are more important. So when I just said that speed is not really the most determining factor of journey time, what else is? Here we go. Express services means a limited number of stops, and then straight corridors. So that means a railway line or alignment that allows the maximum operating speed as often as possible. So when you have a stop at the station, obviously the trains need to slow down so they are off their maximum speed. And if you have a corridor with many curves or other bottlenecks that require slower speed, then you also lose achievable speed and hence journey time. The overall route length matters as well. So if it's too far, if it's more than 200 kilometers roughly in distance between the city and the regional center, it will be extremely difficult to get to a journey time of under 1 hour. So therefore, I have taken 200 kilometers as a rule of thumb for the maximum efficient distance between a city center and a regional center where regional fast rail would make sense. And then lastly, the service frequency, which is also important for making rail transport attractive to passengers. But the service frequency is something that can really evolve over time. So as a starting point, anything between 1 train per hour and up to 6 trains per hour would perfectly suffice for a connection between a city and a regional center if the journey time is attractive enough. 6 trains per hour would be a train every 10 minutes, and that should cover the patronage demand for the foreseeable future. So it doesn't have to be a high capacity service. It's really most important to have an attractive journey time. Some examples from Australia, looking at the 4 biggest cities and the regional centers around it. So in the case of Sydney, some examples of regional centers would be Wollongong, Newcastle, Goulburn, and Parkes. So you see in the second column of this table the population numbers of those subcenters in thousands. So if Wollongong reads 300, that means it's 300,000 people there roughly. At least that was a couple of years ago, the number. I'm not sure how much this has gone up in the meantime, but by and large is probably still the same. Newcastle is slightly bigger. It's around 320. So that's the biggest regional center around Sydney. Hence, it makes sense to have Sydney Newcastle as the first priority of the evolving fast rail network. Goulburn is comparably very small with only 23,000 people. And the question would be whether a regional center this small could really attract the right number of passengers to make a regional fast rail connection really worth the while and effective. Probably not. Parkes has a population of only about 11,000. That's Parkes itself. If you include some other regional centers along the line between Parkes and Sydney, such as Orange, Bathurst, and Lithgow, the numbers would go up to about 100,000 accumulated, but it's still very small compared to Wollongong and Newcastle. So the next column is also very interesting because it looks at the distances. So you may recall earlier I said ideally the distance for regional fast rail connection should be somewhere between 80 and 200 kilometers. So you see that Wollongong and Newcastle with 90 and 160 kilometers would fit into that range. Goulburn is borderline and Parkes would be just too far away for an efficient regional fast rail connection with about 360 kilometers. And what you also have in this column is the journey time of today's connections. And you see that Wollongong currently takes 1 hour and 36. So if you could reduce this by a bit more than a third, by about 40%, you would come under 1 hour, and that would make it very attractive. Newcastle is currently at 2.5 hours, so there is more to be done there, which is mainly due to the corridor. But I think there are concepts, and the aim of the High-Speed Rail Authority is certainly as well to push the journey times for Sydney Newcastle under 1 hour. So that would tick the box for an attractive journey time. Goulburn currently takes 2 hours and 50. And again, for Goulburn, I think the small size of the population really makes it a less ideal candidate for regional fast rail. And Parks has currently a journey time to Sydney of over 7 hours. So this is just completely out of range for regional fast rail. So in summary here, you would have Newcastle and Wollongong as the most suitable candidates for regional fast rail around Sydney. For Newcastle, you've got geographical challenges. You've got multiple areas, hilly areas. You also need to cross a river. So the alignment there will be critical and can really make a huge impact in order to reduce journey times. Wollongong has a different challenge. They have currently 19 stops going into Sydney by rail. So for Wollongong, the key to improve journey times would be to limit the number of stops, to introduce express services, but that would of course get in conflict with the existing suburban services that travel on the same tracks. So something would need to be done to decouple the Wollongong services from the suburban services that operate on the Sydney end between Sydney and Wollongong, not going all the way, but stopping at the boundaries of the Sydney suburban network. So looking at Victoria, which is the other major metropolis in Australia, Melbourne, the regional centers there that need to be looked at are Geelong, Ballarat, Bendigo, Traralgon, Shepparton, and Albury-Wodonga, which is on the border between Victoria and New South Wales on the way to Sydney. In terms of population, the second column of this table, you see that the most attractive regional center by a distance would be Geelong. For the distance and journey time, you also see that Geelong is not just the biggest regional center, it's also the closest to Melbourne with only 75 kilometers. But there are a number of other regional centers where the distance would be under 200 kilometers, which would make it suitable for regional fast rail. Ballarat, Bendigo, they would fit into this category, and even Traralgon and Shepparton would still fit the bill, being under 200 kilometers. And with regards to the journey time, you see that Geelong currently just takes about an hour, a little bit more than an hour. So there, the objective would really be to try to cut it in half, to bring it down to somewhere between 30 and 40 minutes. That would make it very attractive. For Ballarat, it should be possible to push the journey time under 1 hour when regional fast rail was introduced. And for Bendigo, it will be a bit harder, but it's probably also doable. For Traralgon, I'm not so sure, probably not. And you can also see that with regards to the population, Traralgon is probably less attractive. Shepparton, you see the 2 stars there as a side note, would probably only be interesting if there were additional regional centers on the route from Melbourne to Shepparton. And there was a few years back a proposed development called Clara, which was considering the development of 2 new cities in that area. So if that went ahead, then it would be an interesting candidate. Otherwise, probably not so much. And Albury-Wodonga is, with 330 kilometers, simply too far away from Melbourne to make sense for regional fast rail. But it could become a stage, or it would be planned to become a stage of a very high-speed connection between Melbourne and Sydney. And then again, it would make some kind of sense, but not with a view on regional fast rail. So for Melbourne, clearly the best candidate appears to be Geelong. It's the closest. It has already the shortest journey time, which could be made even more attractive. And also the current transport frequency with 5 trains per hour is the highest one, which could go further up. However, there was a recent decision in the last budget in Victoria to suspend the fast rail project to Geelong, so I'm not quite sure what will happen there in the future. I was a bit surprised by that. So maybe the necessity for a faster connection to Melbourne wasn't really seen, or maybe the government there has just run out of money or has other priorities which are closer to metro. For example, suburban rail loop in Melbourne, which would fit into the first category metro, where I said before would always give a better benefit of cost ratio than a regional fast rail connection. So let's have a look at Queensland, and there are 3 centers which could be connected to Brisbane. The Gold Coast with a large population, which is already almost considered a suburb of Brisbane in the south. It's about 80 kilometers away. The current journey time of 1 hour 23 is certainly not attractive enough and would have to be reduced. And one of the things to address would be the relatively high number of 13 stops that you currently have. So if that number could be reduced, maybe down to, 4 or 5, then the journey time could probably be pushed under an hour, and that would be very attractive. And the population size would also justify a solid patronage for a regional fast rail connection. The Sunshine Coast area also has a very attractive population. The biggest problem there is that this population is really distributed across a larger area. So Sunshine Coast is really not just one regional center. It's more like a regional area. And it would have to be seen whether the patronage, the passengers can really be concentrated on maybe 1 or 2 stations along the Sunshine Coast in order to avoid too many stops. And you see that the current journey time is almost 2 hours for only 105 kilometers. And the reason for that is the very high number of stops on the existing railway line to the closest point to the Sunshine Coast. The Sunshine Coast itself doesn't have a rail connection at the moment, but the closest stop on the existing network requires 20 stops to get into Brisbane. And again, for regional fast rail connection, that's something that would have to be addressed. With Toowoomba, you see the distance of 130 kilometers would fit the bill for regional fast rail, but the current journey time of 3 hours and 50 minutes is completely out of range. And as a consequence, you only have 2 train services per week, which shows that this is really absolutely not on the map at the moment for a fast connection. But in the future, even though the priority will be much less than Gold Coast and Sunshine Coast, it could be another candidate which is potentially more suitable than some of the other regional centers we've seen around Sydney or Melbourne. And then lastly, Western Australia. There are really only 2 other regional centers of some sort which are currently connected to Perth, the major city, via railway. Bunbury is 170 kilometers away. The current journey time is 2 hours and 30, which in the timetable is advertised as a relaxing journey. So speed is not really an advertising point there. The other thing is that the population of Bunbury is relatively small compared to regional centers that we've seen in the other states. And at the moment, you only have 2 trains per day. So there are ideas once in a while for a high-speed connection or a fast rail connection to Bunbury, but whether it's really worth it remains to be seen. And the other regional center connected by rail is Kalgoorlie, but you only have 1 to 2 trains per day. On the weekends, probably a bit more, or towards the weekend for the weekend commuters, but the distance with 600 kilometers and a current journey time of almost 7 hours is absolutely unsuitable for regional fast rail. So let's have a look at signaling technologies. For regional fast rail, you will probably require some kind of advanced signaling. You will have some continuous automatic train control, which you always require for train speeds of 160 kilometers per hour or more. The technology selection will have to be driven by the ecosystem. So that means how it fits to other signaling technologies in the respective state or in the main city, and also the connectivity, which means how much interaction, how much interoperability is needed between the regional fast rail network and the suburban city railway. ETCS, the European Train Control System, is probably the front-runner technology, mainly for two reasons. Reason number one, it's globally the most popular signaling technology for mainline railways, and regional fast rail would definitely qualify as a mainline railway. And the second reason would be interoperability with rail traffic in the cities. And both in New South Wales, in Sydney, ETCS is being rolled out, and the same applies in Brisbane, which is the major city in Queensland. And therefore, ETCS is the obvious choice for interoperability. In Victoria, there are future plans to fit ETCS on the city network as well. So therefore, it's pretty much the same choice. Interoperability is really a key consideration here. A case study in India, around Delhi, there's a regional fast train network developing, which is called the Regional Rapid Transit System, RRTS. The motto there is progress through speed. It's a connection of the capital city, which is Delhi, the capital of India. That's why it's called National Capital Region, with some regional centers, starting off with Meerut, which is in the northeast of the slide, so in the upper right-hand corner of the map of the drawing. It's called Regional Rapid Transit System. And the technology used there is a very advanced variety of ETCS level 2, what I would call ETCS level 2 plus. It does have ATO. It doesn't have signals. It has additional virtual blocks for higher capacity in the future. And it's also using LTE radio. So it's the first ETCS over LTE in the world. It's one of the most, probably the most advanced application of ETCS worldwide. And here you see a quick comparison between the regional rapid transit system, so regional fast rail, and the metro system in Delhi. And this is aligned with data that I gave you previously when comparing metro and regional fast rail. The design speed is about twice for regional fast rail than it is for metro. The average speed is even higher. It's about 3 times as much. And the travel time will be just about 1 hour for a distance of 100 kilometers. So that 1 hour travel time is also something that I previously mentioned. So in summary, the key takeaways: number one, there are 3 pillars for passenger rail transport. Metro or high capacity suburban is the first one, regional fast rail the second one, and very high speed with emphasis on very is the third one. Regional fast rail delivers better benefit cost ratios than very high speed. Metro tops the list, but then regional fast rail is a clear second and very high speed comes last. And thirdly, ETCS is the logical choice for regional fast rail and signaling on regional fast rail. So that brings me to the end of this presentation and the end of this podcast episode. Thanks very much for listening. And before you go, let's have a quick word from our sponsor. Hi, this is Doc Frank. I need to tell you about my brand new cutting edge 2024 training, Digital Signaling Interoperability. Interoperability is such a huge issue, not just here in Australia, but in other countries as well. Everywhere where you've got different railway authorities with cross traffics between each other. This course has the latest insights, the latest research. This training includes the SPA framework, Systems, Products and Applications, which creates a lot of clarity and avoids confusion in that area. We then look at the different technologies for digital signaling in Australia. And this is just an example that is transferable to many, many other countries in the world. We then give detailed introductions to the main technologies used in Australia, which are CBTC, ETCS, and ATMS. Then we discuss the hierarchy of interoperability controls, the different ways how interoperability can be handled and addressed. A special session on CBTC interoperability between CBTC products from different suppliers. Then we look at ETCS interoperability. And if you think that comes automatic just by using ETCS, you need to think again. This lesson will address how interoperability in practice can be achieved with ETCS, and it does require some work. And then lastly, interoperability between different technologies. What is required to do that, to achieve that? Which options are available and what is arguably the best? You can get access to this fantastic brand new training under docfranktraining.podia.com/interoperability. I repeat that again, docfranktraining.podia.com/interoperability. If this is a topic of concern for you and your railway organization, then don't miss this training. Hi, it's Doc Frank again. I hope you liked today's episode. I like to keep it as simple as possible, so I only have one single request for you. If you like this podcast, please tell your friends and colleagues about it. That's all I want, because that's a service that I'm providing to the industry, and I would like as many people as possible to listen to this podcast and learn something from it. So please share. And until next time, keep it simple and bye for now. Thank you for listening.